Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, I wanted to run through where I currently stand on the 2020 Electoral College in the matchup between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And I've actually changed a bit from where I had been prior with my previous map prediction videos in the Biden versus Trump head-to-head. And a lot of this has to do not just with the polling that we've been seeing that's been pretty bullish on Joe Biden's chances, but also just the fact that his race and dynamic is a bit different between himself and Trump compared to what we had back in 2016 between Clinton and Trump. And a big, likely a changing factor here for the Democrats is Joe Biden's relative strength among the older age demographic, where Hillary Clinton struggled against Donald Trump, but then also the shift that we saw going from 2016 into the 2018 midterms. The fact that we saw a lot of suburban areas, a lot of Republican congressional districts flipping over to the Democrats, and the fact that Joe Biden is the kind of Democrat that can do very well in these types of areas. And if that trend continues to hold for the Democrats going into 2020, that's also another indicator that could be positive for Joe Biden's chances at defeating Donald Trump. Now, we'll see how all this plays out and how the polls continue to shape out in the coming months, but I've changed some things around, so I wanted to put together another map fill out video. So I'm going to go through every single state. Obviously, a lot of these states are going to be easier to fill out than others. So the ones that are a bit more competitive, probably going to spend a little bit more time on those states. So we'll start out west: Washington, Oregon, California, very consistently deep blue areas that Joe Biden is almost certainly going to be picking up. Whereas Idaho, very Republican. That one is going to be going over to Donald Trump. Now, Montana, I'm actually going to put one step below being safe. And out of this little pocket of the country, it tends to be very Republican in nature, but Montana can be a bit more interesting than some of these other states like Idaho, Wyoming, and South Dakota. And I'll just quickly fill those in, as well as likely being quite safe for Donald Trump to continue to pick up. But Montana, especially on the Senate side, that's likely to be a very close competitive race that the Democrats actually have a decent shot at possibly picking that one up. And we also saw the Democrats, of course, continue to hold the state of Montana in 2018 with John Tester. But in this dynamic, on the presidential level, Montana tends to be a bit more of a safe situation for the Republicans in comparison to the statewide races that we've seen from on the Senate side in the governorship, for instance. But some really interesting races going on there in Montana in 2020. Going to be putting it as one step below being safe there for the Republicans. And then moving down to Nebraska, this is going to be a pretty safe one for Donald Trump as well, outside of the 2nd Congressional District, which I actually give as a slight lean over to Joe Biden. This is one of the districts where the Democrats can have some success. Very close and competitive. They ran a progressive in 2018. She didn't get much in the way of help from the National Democratic Party. We'll see if that changes this time around. They're running the same Democrat in that race. But that's a potential pickup for the Democrats going into 2020 congressionally. And then also Joe Biden has something of a decent shot at potentially going on and picking that one up as well. Moving down into the American Southwest, this is a region of the country that Democrats have been gaining quite a bit over the past decade plus, and this is a trend that looks like it's going to continue to go into the future. Demographics are playing a role in this. Nevada is looking pretty good for Joe Biden, as well as a state like Colorado and New Mexico. Now, Utah, kind of in the middle here of these states that have been trending more in a blue direction. And Utah, if we actually go back to 2016, they had a third-party candidate who's very well known in the state that actually took quite a bit of the share of the vote. So it was kind of an interesting dynamic there, but Trump still went on and won the state rather comfortably in more of a three-candidate race. I think Joe Biden can potentially play a bit better, and without having that third-party influence, maybe keeps things a little bit closer. But Utah, one of the reddest states in general, and I think that's still enough to more than carry Donald Trump to the victory there in that state. Now, Arizona, definitely trending in a blue direction, just like a state like Nevada and Colorado. And also another Senate race to keep in mind there, where it's looking really good that the Democrats can possibly pick that one up, just like they picked up a Senate seat in the state back in 2018. And also Hillary Clinton, very competitive in Arizona against Donald Trump. And this is kind of one of those areas where Joe Biden's relative strength among older voters can definitely help in an area like Arizona that has a bit of an older population. And Arizona isn't the only state that can have a positive impact given Biden's strength among older voters, but it can possibly push him over the line in this one and grab him that state. Now, Texas, down here in the Southwest, also trending in a more competitive direction where it's been very consistently for the Republicans for who knows how many years now. It's been a very long time, of course, consistently conservative Republican state. Going to be giving it as a lean over to Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton was able to keep it within single digits, and it was actually closer percentage-wise in Texas than Iowa, for instance, which had been a state that had gone to the Democrats the 2 elections prior with Barack Obama on top of the ticket. So kind of an interesting result there back in 2016. Not a lot of people would perhaps guess that Texas was a little bit closer than even Iowa was in terms of the percentage difference between Clinton and Trump. And this is an area now 4 years later where the demographics have been helping out the Democrats. Very close statewide Senate race there back in 2018. Biden, I think he can make things interesting in Texas, but I'm not sure that the state of Texas is quite ready to flip at this point in time where perhaps it might be able to do so 4 to 8 years from now. Moving up to Oklahoma, very conservative state, likely to continue to be that way. Kansas, I think there's at least an argument that you could keep it one step below being safe. They're likely to have a competitive Senate race there on top of things. And Trump doesn't have necessarily the greatest approval numbers by any means in Kansas as opposed to some of these other deeply red states in this area. But still, for the time being, going to be putting that one in the safe category for Trump, including the states of Missouri as well as Arkansas. And this kind of gets right into Trump country as we move into kind of the lower Midwest and then into the Southeast, where Louisiana likely continuing to be a safe one there for Trump, and Mississippi, as well as Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia. And that kind of puts us into a situation at this point where you have 106 for Joe Biden, 140 for Donald Trump. You need 270 to win. And we have a lot of interesting states left here in the Midwest and into the Southeast. Also, South Carolina likely to be very safe there for Donald Trump. But then we start getting into the Northeast. And that is an area where Joe Biden should have very strong, consistent success, where we often see that from the Democrats. So just going right down the line here, we have the states of Vermont. New Hampshire, actually, I think is possibly to be pretty competitive, giving the lean over to Biden. Clinton was just barely able to get past Trump in the state. I think Biden has the ability to be a bit more successful than what Clinton was able to show in 2016, but going to be giving that one as a lean. But then we get into Massachusetts, a surprise win there for Joe Biden back on Super Tuesday. We have Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware. Of course, Delaware going to be a safe one there for Joe Biden, who was the senator in the state back in the day. And then we also have Maryland. And, of course, the District of Columbia. They're one of the darkest blue of blue areas that we have here in the Electoral College. And then also, of course, the state of New York. And then statewide in Maine, likely to be safe for Joe Biden, including the 1st congressional district, but the 2nd congressional district can be a bit more in the way of competitive. And I think at this point, just as a slight lean into the edge towards Biden, and some of this has to do with the fact that in 2018, this was a congressional district that the Democrats were able to pick up, which is a bit more of a positive sign for them possibly picking this one up as well, going towards 2020. Now, going back towards the Midwest, Indiana, that's another one that's likely to be pretty safe for Trump, especially with Pence being the vice president on his ticket. So at this point, what I'm going to do is fill out Alaska and Hawaii and then go into the Southeast, work my way up into the East over here, and then into the Midwest. That's how I'll wrap things up. So Alaska, very safe one in general there for the Republicans, likely to continue to be that way for Trump, whereas Hawaii, the exact opposite, very consistently strong for the Democrats. Now, moving into the Southeast, now Georgia and Florida, maybe this is an area where this election is decided if it's closer than what people are expecting, at least at this point in time, and where I think Biden has the difference maker with doing well with that older population in contrast to having that more strength than what Clinton had. I think that makes enough of a difference for him to get a very close win in the state of Florida. I think it's extremely competitive, though. And basically, if you're in a situation where Biden takes Florida, then it becomes extremely difficult for Trump to try to cobble together the 270 electoral votes needed to grab the victory. So that's another one of those key battleground states that's definitely worth keeping an eye on. Now, if Trump wins Florida, there's still pathways that Biden can get to the 270 electoral votes. But like I said, it becomes a bit more difficult on the Trump side if Biden is able to pick up the state. Now, Georgia also has been trending in a very competitive direction, and they have 2 Senate races that are in the realm of potentially being competitive. The polling has been really close here, and I'm at a point where I wouldn't be surprised if Biden was able to pick up Georgia, but still at this point, giving it as a lean over to Donald Trump. He was able to win the state over Clinton by about 5 or so percentage points. And given how this state has been trending, especially in and around the population center of the city of Atlanta and the suburban areas around Atlanta, that's where the Democrats have been gaining some ground. So that's an area to keep an eye on in Georgia. If the Democrats are going to have success statewide, they need to continue to build off of the strength that they've had in that particular population region of the state. We're going to, of course, be keeping a close eye on that one. Now, North Carolina, out of all of these states, I would say this is perhaps as close to a true toss-up as any of them. Also, maybe you could even throw Wisconsin into that mix, given how it's been trending, kind of in that direction where it had been more consistent for the Democrats, and then the Republicans had been gaining a bit. But then we had back in 2018, of course, where the Democrats were able to win those statewide races, continuing to hold that Senate seat, and then flipping the governorship. So it's kind of been in that very strong battleground area as well. But talking about North Carolina, this is a Senate seat that the Democrats can possibly pick up, given how weak the approval numbers are of the incumbent Republican senator. And also we've seen some polls out that have been relatively bullish on the Democrats possibly picking up that Senate seat. And I actually think Joe Biden has just a very, very tilt to his side. These ones that I have in like the true toss-up range, I like to not just go to the lean, but to a tilt one way or the other. And I think there's an argument to be had that North Carolina is at a slight tilt for Biden in that sense. Now, Virginia, Joe Biden did extremely well there in the Democratic primary, and Virginia has been a state that's been trending towards the Democrats, but kind of more an establishment Democrat trending, and that's right up Joe Biden's alley. So I would expect Virginia to continue to hold these trends that we've been seeing from the state and go to Biden in 2020. Pennsylvania, this is an area where Biden should be able to do well given his ties to the state, Scranton and Joe, and that can make a big difference because obviously this was one of the key states that Clinton lost in that surprise defeat that she had in 2016. Going to be giving this one as a lean over to Joe Biden. And if you put Pennsylvania into that lean category, Michigan, which tends in general statewide to be just a little bit more Democratic than Pennsylvania, what we see a lot of the time, I would also consider that one to be a lean over. But one area, if Trump is going to go on and win this election, what he needs to do is hammer home trade deals, NAFTA, saying that Joe Biden has been for all of these awful trade deals that have been shipping your jobs overseas, and that can potentially be an effective strategy against Biden like it was for Trump, of course, against Hillary Clinton in 2016. Perhaps it's more difficult to make that argument for whatever reason. It doesn't seem like it hurt Biden as much as it did Clinton, for instance, in the 2016 primary that we saw between Sanders and Clinton, in contrast between Biden and Sanders, where, you know, that trade deal narrative was a big difference maker. At least that's what many felt for Sanders in some of these areas of the Midwest, and then also, of course, Pennsylvania, where either Sanders was able to pick up surprise wins or they was very competitive with Clinton, whereas Joe Biden was able to just steamroll past Bernie Sanders. So for whatever reason, the trade deals that were tied to Biden didn't make as much of an impact. Perhaps there's, of course, a number of other layers of reasoning as to why people vote the way they do, but perhaps it's not going to hurt Biden as much as it did for Clinton. At least we're kind of getting a snapshot in that for what happened in the primary, and maybe that carries over to the general election as well. Now, Ohio, one of these Midwestern states that has been trending more to the Republicans, I would still put that one in Donald Trump's corner. Illinois, one of the most safe and consistent of the Democratic regions of the Midwest, especially just given how Democratic in and around the Chicago area are, and that's the population center of the state. So if you do well in Chicago, you're very likely to control the statewide elections there in Illinois, which, of course, should go to Biden in this instance, especially with his ties to the former senator of this state, of course, Barack Obama, the former senator from Illinois. So you have those ties there as well. Now, Iowa wasn't necessarily a great state for Joe Biden. If we look back to the caucuses, the Democratic Party is spending a lot of time in this state over the past year, given its ties to the presidential primary that they had there in the state. And I actually think this one is going to be extremely close. The Democrats can possibly pick up this Senate seat at this point in time. I'm going to wait to see more polling, what that's saying down the line, giving it as a lean right now over to Donald Trump. Minnesota, outside of Illinois, probably the second most Democratic state in the Midwest, and we saw how well the Democrats did here back in 2018. I could see an argument where you would put this one as a pretty safe one potentially for Biden, given that strength that we've seen from the Democratic Party in the state, going to be putting it one step below being dark blue. There's also an argument to be made that Trump could be competitive here like he was in 2016 against Clinton. But again, given those trends that we've seen, feeling pretty good about putting it in one step below being safe for Biden. With Wisconsin, I'm just going to put it as a very slight tilt over to Joe Biden. And I feel like Wisconsin, North Carolina, and maybe you can even throw, Florida into that mix, maybe Arizona, some of these areas that can be very competitive. We'll see how it all plays out as we continue to get more data from the polls as well. But as you can see, I've changed some things around. It's made a bit of a difference in the Electoral College, where you have Biden at 335 and Donald Trump at 203. I feel pretty good about how I have this map in terms of the states that are in kind of that likely leans tilt range, whether it's one side or the other. I'd love to hear what you guys think about where we currently stand in this race. Trump's approval numbers haven't been all that great as of late. Maybe some of that has to do with how things have been going with the coronavirus, COVID-19, the response to that, and how the country is moving through that right now. We'll see how that continues to play out going forward as we move towards the general election, which is kind of around a half a year or so away from now, a little bit less than that at this point in time. And I'm going to continue to be making these videos on and off over the course of the coming months, going over some of these interesting races, of course, on the presidential level, but then we also have some of these Senate races and interesting congressional districts as well. So I appreciate you guys stopping by. Consider subscribing for more, and I'll check you back here next time.